On today's show, Blake Snell teasing that maybe a signing finally is imminent, as well as Johnny Brito impressing in his latest spring training start. Who in the world is going to play third base for the Padres? Answering some of your questions and comments. It's the Monday News Pod. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Padres podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. For Monday, March 11th, as always, I'm your host with sometimes occasionally, but certainly not always the most, Javier Reyes. You might be familiar with some of my baseball-related work over at, not obviously this podcast, but also at Just Baseball, where I write about the Padres, write about general baseball, write dumb things about which castle best describes Ryan Mountcastle, as well as a new show that is coming out imminently, similar to hopefully Blake Snell's signing, we hope. So go check that out, guys, over at Just Baseball. You can follow me on Twitter at Javapeno, Javiiipeno, or at LO_Padres. Both accounts will be tweeting heavily about baseball soon, but especially Locked On Padres for only baseball stuff. And also go check out Locked On Padres on YouTube to say hi to everybody's favorite little bobblehead Tatis. Look at him, he's jiggling and wiggling. If you want to see that, go check that out, guys. Today's show, we are going to be talking about some of the latest news. Obviously, it is the Monday pod. This is when we do a little bit of a news recap. Not a crazy amount of news for the Padres, but still some interesting reports and whatnot that I want to get into, and some interesting kind of storylines that we don't have answers to. We don't really have necessarily any new information on, particularly when it comes to who's going to be playing third base, but still fun to talk about. So we're going to get into that, as well as some of your listener questions. And there was a lot of comments and questions this week that I'm excited to get into. So no time to waste. Let's get into it. Actually, let's waste a little bit more time, ladies and gentlemen. Or what's the opposite? It's not like wasting time, but let's use a little bit more time for something else that isn't the show. I may or may not have insulted our sponsor, but whatever. Just remember, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers, join today and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Let's get started with this show, folks. First thing, Blake Snell dropping hints on his Instagram. This is technically Padres news just because I don't think it's like they're officially out on it, because frankly I don't think the Padres are officially ever out on like any player or any trade or any move possibility. And Blake Snell basically just posted like a blank black image, on his Instagram story with the eyeball emoji. I have to say, not gonna lie, now I love Snell, so he's excused from this because I just love him so much, but getting really tired of the athlete and the, in general, sports thing to just put the eyeball emoji, like almost, it just feels like so often we keep seeing that this is just someone trying to start something. And it's a little bit different for Snell because he is an unsigned free agent, so we'll see. But people will be doing this like all the time, and it's like the easiest engagement bait I've ever seen. And I can't stand it. I can't stand that it's become even more popular across every sport to do this. And, it's not as bad as the trend of deleting and like removing the team from your bio that Kyler Murray from the NFL started a few years ago, but it's really, really annoying and frustrating. So that's just me. But anyway, look, I don't know who it's going to be at this juncture, dare I say. It feels like a team like the Angels is going to sign this guy. And what I mean by that is like a non-consequential team in terms of the playoffs next year. No offense to the Angels. I mean, maybe they could, but I'd be very surprised if they somehow, on year like 12 of missing the playoffs with 2 Hall of Famers, now just 1 Hall of Famer on their team, that they just decide to do it after Ohtani leaves, and they have the Rangers and the Astros who are both better than them. So I feel like him signing with that team would actually be really poor, and it would also lend credence to my belief that the contract may not age well for a pitcher like Snell, who's a little bit inefficient, has a little bit of, inconsistency troubles and whatnot, that like he'll have some moments, and the one year he finally does pitch well, maybe it's this first year, it feels like it won't matter because the Angels are going to be a mess. So that's what I feel like I see coming. It's either that or it's a more short player option type of contract, similar to what we've seen for some other Boris clients lately, namely, Matt Chapman being one of them. And someone else did a player option heavy contract. I forgot who it was exactly though. but maybe that could happen. I still don't think it's happening for the Padres. I think they're confident in what they have, for better or worse. I just don't see it, but I'm really waiting. We know Oppenheimer is the best picture. We found that out before Blake Snell finally signed. Like, I'm just like, this is ridiculous. I don't know when he's going to sign. Hopefully it is soon, though. And hopefully, at the very minimum, it's not with any NL West team. That's basically the big thing for Padres fans. Just hope that it's not the Giants. I doubt it would be the Dodgers. Like, they could do anything, obviously. And we'll be talking about the Dodgers a little bit later, too. But I just don't see it. I think that their rotation is kind of stacked, barring an injury. So hopefully it's just not the Giants. Or D-backs. Or Rockies. Rockies would be kind of hilarious, though, let's be honest. It would be kind of funny. But I guess we'll have to wait and see, and we will talk about it whenever he ends up signing, and probably do a crossover with the respective host that is appropriate on the Locked On Podcast Network. So stay tuned for that. In terms of some more news, though, Johnny Brito, really impressive in his last start. 4 2/3 innings. He struck out 6, walked 3, but did not give up any runs, including did have 2 strikeouts of Mike Trout, which was very cool. Just want to say, look, I don't really care about spring training stats. I talked about it on the last show that I think that his stuff, if you literally go by, say, Stuff Plus, if you look at some of his pitching metrics, I think he's okay. I really do. And I think that seeing him work with Niebla could actually be like a really interesting outcome. I think Johnny Brito can be as good as what the team got out of Seth Lugo last year. I think that's kind of his upside for now, which is really, really good. Again, the big thing about him is that he has really good fastball velocity, which is awesome. And the other thing about him is he's only pitched in limited time. Last year was his first year. Doesn't have a true put-away, like runaway put-away pitch, which can either be a good or bad thing. I'm just wondering if like we could see a different mix-up, like a different setup for him going forward. Is he going to use the sinker, changeup, curveball, fastball, slider, or does he maybe get rid of his slider entirely? Does he focus more on a fastball? I'm just curious to see what Niebla works with him, especially since he doesn't have like that one for sure pitch that he seems to go to in the most situations. It seems like his curveball is really effective. It does have a high whiff percentage on it, but mostly I'm excited. I'm excited about Brito, and I think Brito can be really, really solid for this team. And then it just depends on Randy Vasquez and Matt Waldron, potentially for that last spot, which we talked about last week. So I'm curious to see how that all pans out. I'm telling you, I'm not panicking about the Padres pitching. They're not in like a great setup, but I would argue that there is no team that's in a great setup. As I've said before, it's like every team is always saying we need more pitching, we need more pitching. Unless you're the Braves and the Dodgers and the Mariners, you need more pitching. And I don't think that the Padres, compared to a lot of other teams, are at some sort of DEFCON 1, DEFCON 4, whichever is the highest situation. So either way, I'm excited for Brito. I think he'd be effective as Seth Lugo. Not necessarily as much as Michael Wacha. I think Michael Wacha kind of had like a career year in a lot of ways, and I just don't see that from Brito immediately. But again, we'll just have to see, because what do I know? I'm just the idiot rocking out in his, mom's basement library, recording a Padres podcast. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's continue on, though. That's not the only storyline, of course. We're going to talk about a few more things, namely third base and whatnot. What's going on with third base? Because that is dare I say, not the last remaining, but one of the last remaining big questions for this Padres team going forward and heading into that series in Seoul on March 20th. So 9 days away from some real baseball action, which is crazy. Absolutely crazy to note that like this is my last clean week of no real baseball games. That's really, really weird to me. And I'm still not over it. It feels very weird. But ladies and gentlemen, you know who's always been there? Regardless of if it's the official season or whatnot, the good folks over at FanDuel. Ladies and gentlemen, say goodbye to busted brackets, because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney. So don't worry. If you get, I'm not going to lie, I don't even know who's good this year. If you get knocked out, Kentucky, I'm going to assume they're good. If Kentucky gets knocked out for you, well, guess what, FanDuel, you want to bet you want to get your revenge and bet against the team that beat them? Don't worry, they got you covered. Right now, customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 wins. Folks, that's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. You know what I mean? Again, I don't really know. I have been watching. I'm tempted to pick USC to win the women's tournament. That's the one that I'm paying attention to. I know everyone's on Iowa, obviously, because of Caitlin Clark. But hey, pick whoever you want. I am a March Madness winner of like an 80-person group before. It is true. My senior year of college. Woohoo! That was awesome. And FanDuel, they've got all sorts of options for you to become the champion of March Madness. So go check that out, FanDuel.com/lockedon, and bet on college hoops until they cut down those nets. And just like that, ladies and gentlemen, we are back here on the Locked On Padres podcast, recounting some of the news and whatnot. I hope you have enjoyed, by the way, this show over the past off season. You know what I mean? This off season, I've been trying my best to kind of keep it as engaging as possible, considering that I've been going 5 days a week for a while, considering I went 5 days a week after the Padres were eliminated back in like October. So it's been a little bit hard, but hopefully you guys are enjoying. And if you are, please subscribe. Please send me any of your questions or comments. I like reading them. That's right. Even if you comment, you might make an appearance on the Monday show. You know? Guess what? Everyone can hide behind a screen, but sometimes you come face to face with me, folks. In terms of the other latest news, Yuki Matsui, I want to quickly talk about this. There's still no word on him, and according to the latest reports that we've seen, a couple from AJ Casaval and Dennis Lin, that there's still questions about whether or not he's going to be available for opening day. He's been having some back spasm issues. Look, this is going to be a big story to follow. I actually think that this might be the most consequential for just the upcoming series, obviously. If Yuki Matsui is available, I know Gavin Lux, who's been getting a little bit slandered online lately because of his poor defense and may or may not have the yips over at second base, which is why they moved him off shortstop, that he was like, wow, his stuff is amazing. Like, he was impressed. Matsui looks great. And my theory about him stays the same, which is that I think there's a good chance that he just blazes onto the scene and is like a Masahiro Tanaka type guy. If anyone remembers that first year he had with the Yankees, in terms of an international player, Japanese player, that comes in and no one can figure him out for a little bit. I think that there's a decent chance of that happening. I actually wouldn't even be shocked if like a month or so in, depending on how Robert Suarez is going, if Matsui's the closer. But for now, he's like a premier setup man. Hopefully he's available because that is a big, big acquisition. Honestly, outside Michael King, and if you take out the Michael King thing, probably the biggest free agent signing that the Padres have made this offseason, which is a little bit of an indictment on them, I must say. A little bit of an indictment on them, I will admit. And hey, what can we do? That's a whole other topic entirely that we will be discussing potentially on tomorrow's podcast. But for now, that's it. Hopefully Matsui is healthy by opening day. Last thing, we have two more things, ladies and gentlemen. Number one, Mike Schilt basically confirms not to expect Manny Machado at the start of the season, this sole series, at third base. Now, he has been raking. He had a good game the other day, 3 for 3 with a double at DH. And that's cool. I'm fine with that. I think that the Padres have some potential options there. Obviously, Manny Machado, his gold glove, diamond glove, I want to say at this point. I know he hasn't actually won a platinum glove or anything like that, but he was amazing at third last year, and that's why he was still, despite struggling with runners on base, despite struggling to hit homers with runners on base, all that stuff, was still an effective player. And a big part of that was because the glove was one of the best defensive outputs he'd put in a few years, I think, for the Padres. He's always good, don't get me wrong, but excellent is what we got out of Machado last year. Can't wait for him to be back. Going to be really interesting, and maybe this might allow him to focus on hitting and have him bounce back in that one area, right? So I'm curious to see how they slowly, over the course of the season, get him back, and just frankly, when they start to try and get him back. We have to see, depending on how that surgery panned out and whatnot. But in terms of who will play third base, that's the other thing. Eggy Rosario, Graham Pauley, or Matthew Batten. It seems like a lot of people are saying Graham Pauley can play third. However, there are a little bit of questions about his his ability to play third from the glove perspective. There's Eggy Rosario, where there's some questions about his bat, but it seems like he can play third pretty effectively. He's actually had a couple highlight moments in spring so far. And then Matthew Batten, kind of the same thing. Although I will say, while Matthew Batten doesn't seem to have the same pedigree, the same, the same approval rating on his bat, I'm just saying, in 43 games last year, 258, 355, 358 slash line, WRC plus of 106, was playing decent defense in those 43 games and all those 139 plate appearances. Not a lot of power, only 2 home runs, but I just want to throw it out there. That's not that bad. I think it would depend, though, because, again, if they don't like his bat, a guy who's not really hitting for any power at third base, you got to be really good defensively to make up for that. But it depends. I think it all depends on what route they want to go. I could see multiple possibilities here. I could see them swapping these guys out. I could see one getting optioned over the course of this time. Really curious. And Graham Pauley is a player that Arm Layton, friend of the show, also co-founder of Just Baseball, great website, go check it out. He's been on the show before, and he's really high on Grant Pauley. He thinks that he might be this overlooked prospect, particularly with his bat, that may rise through the rankings this year. And maybe that's what's happening here. Maybe they have this low-key diamond in the rough in Grant Pauley. The only question for me has been, what position is he going to play? It seems like, by all accounts, the analysis and stuff that I read in reports and stuff that I hear is that there's not a for sure idea of where he's going to play. There's been rumors, this was also said by Dennis Lin in The Athletic, maybe he could play first base on some days. Now, how would that work exactly? I imagine it'd be Bogarts getting a day off, or maybe they put Bogarts at DH some days, especially when Manny Machado gets back, and then you can maybe move Jake Cronenworth back to second, which is one of the founding principles for why your boy this offseason had once been campaigning to trade Ha-Seong Kim, because you could get Cronenworth back at second and maybe get more value out of him. So we'll see how that all plans out. I like all three of those guys to an extent. I think there's some sleeper potential with them, and particularly with Paulie. I think because of his bat, that I think he's got something there. We just have to see how he plays out over at third base. I'm not totally sure. The last piece of news, though, that I want to mention really quickly, officials haven't ruled out Tommy Pham reuniting with the Padres, but it may be after the Seoul series. Look, the Padres have an early start to their season, and most other teams, they're going to have 2 games, and then they're going to come back and play some spring training. So there's still time for moves to be made. I actually got into not a spat, but I did comment. Shout out Ben Fadden on Twitter, who hosts Talking Friars. And made the comment basically saying, all they've done is they've traded Matt Carpenter and Ray Kerr. They signed Matsui, Woo-Sat Go, Wandy Peralta, and Jerickson Profar. And total 2024 money spent on major league signings since the Juan Soto trade is only $9.35 million. And my thing, and I responded to this saying that I do think that the fear that the Padres are reverting back to cheapskates needs to be tempered just a little bit, because there's already a lot of stars on the team. Usually you're supposed to complain about the teams that don't have a lot of stars and just sit there, i.e. Cleveland, Milwaukee, Tampa, teams like that, right? Pittsburgh, St. Louis every now and then, frankly, although they have one, but you get my point. They have a desire to reset the luxury tax threshold, which I think is totally fine. Going all in on flashy moves has also just not worked. Remember, this team has not won under AJ Preller more than 89 games. So clearly the big spending hasn't necessarily worked. You should still spend, but it's been so inconsistent that I think it's okay if they're saying, let's not go all in on what we have when we genuinely just don't know what we have every year. Our upside is as high as most teams in baseball, but you keep seeing that they go from being not just they don't make it to the World Series, but they don't make the playoffs, right? That's the problem. This is a team that is disappointed year after year. Not year after year, but year after every other year, right? You have a big collapse, then you have the NLCS, then you have another awful season last year, and then we have this year. So I think it's fair not to go all in, and not to mention, in my opinion, the biggest part of this is having some roster flexibility, and next year's offseason is so much bigger. That's the thing. Next year's offseason is stacked. So if they are resetting their luxury tax threshold this year, maybe they're doing a mini Dodgers light where they're resetting their chilling this year, making small additions the way that the Dodgers made additions of JD Martinez and Jason Hayward last year. And then next year will be their year to spend, similar to what the Dodgers did this year. That could be a possibility. And I will say, and Ben actually responded to me saying, is someone like Rosario and Tommy Pham, are those guys going to break the bank? And I agree, no. I am wondering, though, if Pham wants another year, which is what's been holding them up. If what's been holding them up is that Pham wants $8 million and they're only willing to go $6 million, then we can start talking about complaining. In my opinion, though, I would wait until next year. I'd wait until deadlines to see if the Padres are good and they still don't do anything. Then you can start talking about it with the passing of Peter Seidler, whether or not the new ownership face and group is not going to be nearly as committed to winning. Although, again, I partially doubt that, because they did still have amazing ticket sales, and they still have a lot of big contracts on this team that aren't going anywhere anytime soon. Look, if there pops up Manny Machado trade rumors to the Yankees, then we can talk about how it's Jover, right? But for now, I'm not freaking out, and I don't know what's going on behind the scenes, because I do not want to have more money allocated for next year, because they don't have a lot of wiggle room. It's around $150 million that they've got next year, and if they have this $200 million line, I want to have as much available as possible for next year's free agent class, which, in my opinion, just based on pitching alone, has 3 guys from Corbin Burns and Max Fried and Walker Buehler that I think are better than Blake Snell. I do. I think those guys are better than Blake Snell. At his best, Blake Snell might be better than them, but that's the thing, is I think that those guys are a little bit more consistent. So that's just me. Maybe I'm crazy, but alas, we'll have to see. And also, he mentioned Dennis Lin. Maybe after the Soul Series. Maybe that's what's happening right now. We'll have to see. Although, granted, it is late, so we got to hurry up and get there. You know what I'm saying? But that about does it for the news portion of this show, guys. We're going to get into some listener questions and comments to close out this Monday pod and close out the start of your beautiful week. I hope it is. But before we do that, let me just quickly talk to you about the legendary Amazon Fire TV Stick, folks. Here's the thing. I talked about this before on last show, where I was like, look, a friend of mine, he lost his Amazon Fire TV Stick. We don't know how it happened. It vanished into thin air. I'm not kidding, like some Houdini magic. And we can't find it, and it stinks because Amazon Fire TV is your destination for sports, from live games to highlights, in-depth interviews and analysis. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV Stick that my friend lost, RIP, that you could plug into your existing TV that provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live TV. Whether it's opening weekend for baseball, the March Madness tournament, you're going to want to have a Fire TV. They recently added also Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest video content from your favorite sports brands, all for free. And that includes all of us over here at Locked On. So check that out. And again, just RIP to us not finding that. And shouts to you at Charlie Crow 2312, by the way, who said 3 years later we found it in the couch. It slipped in a weird spot. It was a recliner and hard to get to. Keep looking, brother. So shouts to you. Hey, it's not my Fire TV Stick, but it's still funny that we never found it. It's really, really funny. But anyway, guys, go check that out and dive into all of your favorites. Trust me on this. To learn more, visit amazon.com/lockedonfiretv. And just like that, we are back here, ladies and gentlemen, on the Locked On Padres podcast. The waning moments of this here podcast, ladies and gentlemen. Let's get into the questions. Let's get into the comments. Let's do it. First up is a big chunky one, and it is once again the Dodger fans getting on me yet again. From sub04 ARU. So maybe I think you're trying to do a Subaru thing. So shouts to you. He says, I didn't know that no other teams were competing in the 2020 playoffs. Come on, man. Defend your team all you want, but don't be that casual MLB fan and diminish a playoff series. All teams played 1-1. And if you're going to diminish it, at least explain how one team had a specific advantage over another given the circumstances of that year. I have yet to hear a smart take rather than a sour grapes take. The Giants are definitely not little brother to the Dodgers. Those are also casual fan remarks in my opinion. I think they're pretty even, all things considered. I would actually argue they aren't even, all things considered, but I get your point. The Dodgers have been dominant. The Giants have more World Series, but the Dodgers really have been super dominant for the last 15 years or so. Padres, there's still a little bit of a little brother vibe, but it's the little brother that is in his junior year in high school and finally kissed a girl, so he has some bravado now. Still hasn't gotten another word, but got to third base with the fat girl. Okay, so first of all, you didn't need to get all body shaming and whatnot at the end, my guy, but I want to once again say that to clarify a couple things. There's a little gray area, and I tweeted about this yesterday. There's a little gray area I operate where I do think it's kind of ridiculous that people say that the 2020 championship doesn't count. My thing is more of a reaction to the fans, right? Dodgers fans, in my experience, including Jeff Snyder of Locked On Dodgers, act like they run town. That's why I bring up, hey, it does say a lot, though, that you guys only avoided the choke in 2020. That's all I'm saying. If the Orioles had won in 2020, if the Diamondbacks had, if the Rays, if the Brewers, maybe not the Brewers, those are bad examples, but teams that never aren't going to really have a chance and they won, I don't think they get slandered as much. It's just that they're getting slandered as more. It's imagine if James Harden, the one time he had a good playoff series and good stretch in the playoffs was when he only had to play one series and there was only a 20-game season. You know what I mean? It just says a lot. Because then, right after that 2020, you then continued to have some really bad playoff disasters. Now, don't get me wrong. The Dodgers are the top of the top. They are still amazing. But their fans need to stop acting like they're the 90s Yankees. That's what I feel about it. The 90s Yankees who win 3 World Series out of 4 years, including 3 in a row, dominating the league. And by the way, Jeff Snyder, again, acted all big and bad as if he runs this stuff, especially runs this channel. Meanwhile, shouts to Ben Kaspick of Locked On Giants. I'm like, he's won more World Series than y'all. Y'all won 3 in 4 years. Like, the Dodgers, their last thing was getting swept by the D-backs. So that's my only thing, is they are amazing, and no, they should not be slandered for spending money. That is a good thing. But I do think the fan base needs to stop acting like they're, the Giants, the 1927 Murderers Row Yankees, the, Red Sox, frankly, of this generation. They've won more. And the other thing is this: the Royals have as many World Series wins as you guys. So over the last 10 years, right? So that's my only thing, is stop acting like the 90s Yankees. That's why I bring up. It does say a lot that y'all carry yourselves this big, and then the only time you didn't choke was that year. And I'm not saying that you had more an advantage on another team. I do say, though, that the fans were in my comments for about 2 weeks, including Jeff Snyder, after they beat the Padres in 2020. And my thing was, you guys won, probably still would have won, but it's weird to flex that this is the one time you didn't choke, and also the Padres didn't have their top 2 starting pitchers for that series. That's all I'm saying. No, I do not think it should be diminished. I'm just saying there's a little bit of a gray area. I know it sounds like I contradict myself, but there's a gray area where it counts, but also when it comes to y'all acting like you're the baddest in town, keep in mind everything that I've said so far. But what do I know? I'm just the idiot Padres fan. Next up, from @IreFanGeek1624. When we miss out on guys like CJ Cron at a minor league deal, that would have been a perfect lefty-righty combo at first base. Cron DH against lefties, Jake DH against righties. They switch up at first base, you have solved your DH problem. And if Jake's belly gets any bigger, then he will start looking like a DH with the laughing emoji. But yet no, I am now under the impression that AJ Preller is getting set up to be fired at the end of the season. If they plan on running a quadruple A guy, at DH, and young prospects in the outfield, and not one lefty arm in the starting rotation, it is just simple math. But the season hasn't started yet, so let's keep our fingers crossed, Padres fans, and the rant is over. Thank you for your comment, first of all. So here's the thing. With Machado at third base, I think it's a little bit hard for them to add some DH-only players. You know what I mean? Like, because at least Machado, it's like, it's only going to be for a limited amount of time, and then he's going to go up to third base. DH-only players that might be like minuses defensively. So, for example, like a person like Jesse Winker, that it's hard to add a player like that because they're going to have to play the outfield until Machado gets off of DH. You know what I mean? Like, they're going to want to have Machado hitting because he's Manny Machado. So I do see that. And then I will say that the idea that AJ Preller is getting set up to fail this season, I think is a little bit ridiculous personally, because while I see it in a vacuum, what you're saying, new ownership, this is what they do sometimes when it's not their guy, right? Like, ownership is going to want to have their guy in. But in my opinion, they would have fired him already if that was the case. And also, it's not like AJ Preller is like some helpless person. Like, this, again, have not won more than 89 games since he took over. And they've had a lot of disappointments, and they've signed all these big contracts. And there's been a lot of signs of, like, not planning ahead. I.e., you want to extend Ha-Seong Kim, yet you signed Xander Bogaerts. You know what I mean? To like an 11-year deal. You traded CJ Abrams for Juan Soto, but then you didn't keep Juan Soto. And CJ Abrams could have been the shortstop of the future. So that's where I'm at on that. I don't think he's being like some target or anything like that. But I do understand what you're saying. I do empathize with if the Padres don't sign some of these one-year guys, assuming that's what they're asking for. Again, I'm still wondering if one of the reasons that Pham is a holdup is because he wants another year. And I do not want to have any more money committed to next year, or players, frankly, outside the obvious ones that you can't get rid of, like the stars. So that's just me, though. I could be totally wrong. But continuing to read some more comments. From @BoMurray6219. Great show. I can't listen to any other Locked On podcast because they aren't nearly as good as you. I heard someone on the radio say that Peter Seidler was in bad health during the 2023 free agency, and that's why he was more willing to spend big and recklessly to win a World Series before he left this world. What are your thoughts on this? I have heard that they were potentially going to spend anyway, even regardless of Seidler, and that was just kind of the directive. But I understand what you're saying. And then also, thank you for the very kind words. There are plenty of great people on the Locked On Podcast Network, but I appreciate your love for my show. All the listeners, all the viewers and listeners. Got no beef. I love all y'all. Thanks for listening. Or watching. Yeah, I mean, look, it's possible that there's a little bit more. To me, the bigger problem is that they didn't make the playoffs and the TV deal. You know what I mean? Like all that stuff, the weird stadium stuff going on right now too. I think that's the bigger deal personally in terms of why they, and then the luxury tax threshold. But obviously RIP to Peter. But maybe it would I think for like the Bogarts thing, I think that might make sense. You know what I mean? Because the Bogarts thing is like an 11-year deal at a position that you didn't necessarily need to fill up because you had Kim, right? And once upon a time has CJ Abrams, but that's my thing is maybe with the Bogarts thing, but I don't know enough, frankly. I'm not that keyed in to what's going on over there with the Seidler situation and exactly like what the difference is going to be in the spending and whatnot. Moving on to my guy, Chris Chapman. Do you think we should sign Joey Votto for DH? Likely only $1 million or so bucks. First of all, he has signed already, though, with a team. Not when Chris Chapman made this question. Don't worry, I'm not taking shots. But he recently signed over the weekend with the Blue Jays. And even if he hadn't, no, I wouldn't want to. I do like the veteran presence. I do think there's something to say for that. Joey Votto is a potential Hall of Fame caliber player. He's been an on-base legend for years. And not too long ago, he actually had a decent bounce back. That random year, you remember that? But this plays into my last hurrah theory, which is when really good players have been kind of stinky for a while, and then they have that like bounce back season. I feel like that's like a last hurrah. And what I mean by that is let's go look up Mark Teixeira with the Yankees. Go look up Alex Rodriguez with the Yankees. I'm using a lot of Yankees. Go look up Evan Longoria with the Rays. The last year before he, I think, was traded, he had like a 34 home run season and then fell off a bit after that. It became what he was today, which is like a little bit of a bench player. 2021, Joey Votto, 140 WRC plus, 3.8 F4, was really good. Then last year, negative 0.8, and then last year barely played. Only 65 games and had a 0 WAR, hitting at 200 level. Still had the walks and whatnot, but the WRC plus cratered. This to me would have been the epitome of another Nelson Cruz, Robinson Cano type of acquisition. Nothing against the guy. I hope he succeeds. Maybe he'll do better for the Blue Jays. That's another thing, but it hasn't worked out for the Padres lately. These veteran kind of, not to be mean, but washed up a little bit past their prime, much past their prime type of players. So no, I would not have been a fan of it. I'd much rather take a chance literally on a Jesse Winker, because I think Jesse Winker in the right platoon role can be really effective. He rakes against, I think, lefties it is. So that's just me. But thank you for your question, Chris. And last one from @Josiah Schwartz. Yes, very easy to be optimistic about the Padres with 4 to 5 holes in the lineup and 40% of the lineup. The whole Padres, in quotes, the whole Padres will have to be better one-run games and extras also ignores how much Soto, Snell, Waka, and Lugo and Hader did to actually keep the Padres in those games to begin with. Agreed, but I think that is also ignoring the ability of the Padres to get on base. Xander Bogaerts in a vacuum was good last year. Tatis in a vacuum was good last year. Manny Machado was okay last year. But so many guys were bad with runners in scoring position. And you do bring up Michael Waka and Seth Lugo. They were great too, but I don't think that Waka and Lugo are irreplaceable guys. Snell's season is irreplaceable. I do admit that. But, Snell, did he potentially peak at one time? And again, I still think regardless of the roster, it's still crazy for you to be losing that amount of games. And they still have a lot of stars in this lineup. I just don't think that it's not like Juan Soto was the only star player that the Padres had in the lineup. That's my thing. And they made the NLCS with less players. They had like a better first half of their season before they even traded for Soto. And by the way, keep in mind, Soto wasn't that great with the Padres when he first got there. Not bad, but he wasn't hitting well. He wasn't slugging well when he got traded to the Padres. So I'm just saying, like, you could replace that with anything. The Padres in 2022 were very good. Like a solid, really well done team, and they performed in the clutch. And they had much less talent. They had no Tatis. They had no Bogarts. Ha-Seong Kim wasn't as good offensively just yet, although he had improved. And then you have, Juan Soto, Brandon Drury wasn't playing well. Josh Bell wasn't playing well. So don't get me wrong. They had a little bit more later in the season, but I don't want to assume that they can't be better, especially when the biggest culprit seems to have been runners in scoring position. But again, I do get your point. I do think that it is fair to bring up that, say, I didn't like the bullpen for the Padres last year. They did keep them in games sometimes, though. Although then whenever they were up by 2 runs, then they would blow it and vice versa. So they just were a team that found ways to lose last year. And I just don't think that's going to happen again. But I understand your point that those guys really did help. And for you to not be able to replace them so easily does say a lot. But again, I've been watching baseball for a long time, guys. These things flip. And when you still have the stars there, it usually is going to flip in your favor. But what do I know? Like I said, I'm just the idiot Padres fan with Pac-Man and Tatis right in front of him, recording and talking to himself in a lonely library room. So what do I know? But with that all being said, everybody, that about does it for today's edition of Locked On Padres podcast, the only pod that may be better than the Padres themselves. Thank you for your comments and questions, occasionally even the mean ones. Totally for that. Please send me more. I love reading your comments, including the ones that may or may not be mean. Feel free to DM me on Twitter at Javapeno, JAVIIPENO, or at LO_Padres. We'll be doing more, listener questions and whatnot next week, and prep some good stuff, because next week will be officially like, we're getting regular season games finally. So that's going to be really exciting. In terms of the future of the show, don't quite know. In full transparency, maybe I might talk about the Padres spending thing a little bit more on tomorrow's show. We're going to be talking about the Padres lineup. We're going to be talking about old players that they were interested in once upon a time to illustrate the idea of this not spending thing. All sorts of fun stuff, maybe some other crossovers. But until next time, stay safe, and of course, stay faithful. My Friar Faithful homies, take care.